Elena's hands trembled as she packed the last of her belongings into a worn leather bag, her heart pounding so hard she feared the sound alone might give her away. Outside her window, the moon hung low and heavy, the same moon that had witnessed everything 3 months ago. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the faint flutter that had changed her entire world, and she knew she had only hours before her scent would betray her secret to every wolf within a mile. She was Elena Whitfield, a quiet young woman from the Ashwood Park, a park that had spent generations locked in cold rivalry with the Kingsley Park ruled by Alpha King Damian Kingsley. 3 months ago, during a rare truce gathering meant to ease decades of tension between the two parks, Elena had crossed paths with the Alpha King himself. What began as a simple conversation under the stars had turned into something neither of them expected, something reckless, something that could never be undone. Now she was pregnant with his child, and the weight of that truth pressed down on her like a mountain. Elena knew the history too well. An Alpha King's heir born from a low-ranking woman of an enemy pack was not a blessing. It was a spark waiting to ignite a war. Council members on both sides would see the child as either a threat or a weapon, something to be controlled, hidden, or worse, eliminated to protect fragile political balances. She had heard the whispered stories of what happened to unclaimed pups born into rivalries like this one. She would not let her child become a casualty of politics before it even took its first breath. She zipped her bag shut and cast one last look around the small room that had been her entire life. The wooden dresser her father built with his own hands. The faded curtains her mother had sewn. The window that faced the forest where she used to run free as a child. She would miss it all, but staying meant risking everything. A knock came at her door, sharp and sudden. Elena froze. "Elena," came her older brother's voice, low and urgent. "Council elders are asking about you. They say your scent has changed. They want you examined." Her stomach dropped. It was happening faster than she anticipated. She had maybe an hour, perhaps less, before the park healer would confirm what her body already knew. "I'm not feeling well," she called back, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I'll see the healer in the morning." She heard her brother hesitate outside the door, his breathing audible even through the wood. He didn't trust her answer, she could tell, but he didn't push further. Not yet. The moment his footsteps faded down the hallway, Elena moved. She slipped out through her window into the cool night air, dropping silently onto the soft grass below. Her wolf senses screamed at her to be careful, to mask her steps, to slow her heartbeat so it wouldn't echo through the pack bond that connected every member of Ashwood to their alpha. She had prepared for this moment for weeks. A human friend she had met while working part-time at a bookstore in town had once mentioned an old car for sale, cheap and reliable, parked behind an abandoned garage on the edge of the territory border. Elena had bought it in secret, paying with savings she had hidden away for exactly this purpose. She reached the garage within 20 minutes, her breath ragged, her legs aching from running faster than she ever had in her life. The car started on the third try, its engine coughing before settling into a steady hum. Elena gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, and pulled out onto the empty road leading away from everything she had ever known. She drove through the night without stopping, watching the trees blur past her window, watching the borders of Ashwood territory shrink smaller and smaller in her rearview mirror. Somewhere behind her, she knew, the pack bond would soon alert the elders that something was wrong. They would search. They would call the Kingsley Park, perhaps, to see if their Alpha King knew anything about the disappearance of a low-ranking Ashwood woman. And if Damian learned the truth even a moment too soon, everything would fall apart before she could protect her child. By dawn, Elena crossed into human territory, far from any wolf settlement she recognized. She pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of a small town called Millbrook, her hands shaking as she filled the tank. She caught her reflection in the window glass, pale and exhausted, dark circles forming under her eyes. She barely recognized herself. She thought of Damian then, unwillingly, the memory rising unbidden. His commanding presence, the quiet intensity in his gaze, the surprising gentleness in his voice when he had spoken to her that night, as though for those few hours the weight of his crown didn't matter at all. She wondered if he ever thought about her, or if their night together had already faded into nothing more than a forgotten moment for a man with an entire kingdom to run. She pushed the thought away. It didn't matter now. What mattered was survival, hers and her child's. Millbrook seemed like a good place to disappear. It was small enough that a new face wouldn't draw much attention, yet large enough to offer anonymity among its bustling human population. Alena found a modest apartment above a laundromat, paying the first month's rent in cash under the name Ellen Ward, a name she had chosen weeks ago after long nights of careful planning. She took a job at a diner on Main Street, waiting tables for cash under the table, avoiding anything that required identification she didn't have. The owner, a kind older woman named Margaret, never asked too many questions, simply grateful for reliable help. Alena kept to herself, spoke little of her past, and focused entirely on building walls around the life she was trying to protect. At night, alone in her small apartment, she allowed herself brief moments of vulnerability. She would sit by the window, one hand resting on her growing stomach, and whisper promises to the child growing inside her. She promised safety. She promised love. She promised that no matter what happened, no matter how far she had to run, her child would never be used as a pawn in a war it never asked to be part of. But there were nights when fear crept in despite her best efforts to keep it at bay. She had heard stories of alpha trackers, wolves gifted with senses so acute they could follow a trail code for weeks. She had heard that Damien himself possessed abilities beyond most alphas, a connection to his territory and his people so strong that some whispered he could sense disturbances in the pack bond from miles away. If even a fraction of those stories were true, she wondered how long she truly had before her hiding place was discovered. She trained herself carefully to suppress the parts of herself that might give her away. She learned to walk without the natural grace of her wolf heritage, to keep her heartbeat steady even in moments of stress, to avoid any behavior that might catch the attention of a passing wolf, should one ever wander through Millbrook. It was exhausting, living a lie every single day, but she reminded herself constantly that the alternative was far worse. Meanwhile, far from Millbrook, in the heart of Kingsley territory, Alpha King Damien sat in his private study, staring at a report he had read a dozen times already. His most trusted tracker, a lawyer wolf named Corwin, stood before him with his hands folded behind his back. "Nothing, Alpha," Corwin said quietly. It's as though she vanished into thin air. No scent trail past the eastern border. No sightings reported by any pack contacts. Damien's jaw tightened. It had been weeks since the truce gathering, weeks since he had spent that unexpected night with a woman whose name he barely knew before she disappeared from his life entirely. He told himself it shouldn't matter. She was Ashwood, an enemy pack, a complication he didn't need given the fragile peace talk still ongoing between the two territories. Yet something about her absence gnawed at him in ways he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't simple curiosity. It was something deeper, an instinct buried in his wolf that refused to settle, a persistent unease that told him something significant had happened that night, something he hadn't fully understood at the time. "Keep looking," Damien said finally, his voice low but firm. Quietly. "I don't want the council involved in this." Corwin nodded and left without another word, leaving Damien alone with his thoughts and the restless feeling that had followed him for weeks. He walked to the window overlooking his territory, the vast forest stretching toward the horizon under a pale morning sky. He thought of Elena's face, the way she had looked at him without fear or flattery, simply as a man rather than a king. It was a rare thing, and he found himself missing it more than he cared to admit. He didn't know yet what she carried. He didn't know that somewhere beyond his reach, a child of his blood was growing inside a woman who had run because she believed it was the only way to keep that child safe. But something inside him, some ancient instinct passed down through generations of alpha bloodlines, told him this was far from over. Back in Millbrook, Alena continued her quiet life, day by day, week by week, growing more accustomed to her new identity even as her pregnancy advanced. She avoided mirrors when she could, unable to reconcile the reflection staring back at her with the woman she used to be. She missed her family, her brother's protective presence, even the familiar sounds of pack life she had grown up with. But every time doubt crept in, every time she considered turning back, she reminded herself of what was at stake. She had made her choice. Now she simply had to survive it, one day at a time, praying that the walls she built around her secret would hold long enough to protect the most important thing she had ever created. 6 months had passed since Alena arrived in Millbrook, and her body now carried the unmistakable shape of a woman deep into her pregnancy. She moved slower these days, her balance shifting with the added weight, and she had grown skilled at hiding the discomfort behind polite smiles whenever customers at the diner asked if she was doing well. Margaret, the diner owner, had grown fond of Elena over the months, treating her with a warmth Elena hadn't expected from a stranger. One quiet afternoon, as Elena wiped down the counter after the lunch rush, Margaret approached with a look of concern etched across her weathered face. "You've been carrying that baby alone this whole time," Margaret said gently. "No family visits, no calls, nothing. I don't mean to pry, dear, but is there someone who should know about this? A husband, perhaps? Family?" Elena's throat tightened. She had rehearsed answers to questions like this many times, yet each time they came, they still stung with the truth she couldn't share. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Where I'm from, things aren't simple. It's safer for both of us if I handle this on my own." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, though her eyes remained soft with worry. "Well, you're not entirely alone anymore. Not while you're here." She reached out and squeezed Elena's hand, a small gesture that meant more to Elena than Margaret could possibly know. From that day forward, Margaret quietly took on the role of a guardian figure in Elena's life, insisting she take breaks when her feet swelled, bringing extra food home for her at the end of shifts, and eventually connecting her with a retired midwife named Doris who lived just outside of town and had delivered babies for decades before the local hospital became the standard choice for most families. Doris was sharp-eyed and perceptive, the kind of woman who noticed details others might overlook. During Elena's first visit, Doris paused while checking her pulse, her brow furrowing slightly. "Your heartbeat is unusual," Doris commented, more curious than alarmed. "Steadier than most, even during moments that would normally cause stress. And your body temperature runs warmer than average. Have you always been this way?" Elena felt a flicker of panic but forced herself to remain calm, drawing on months of practice suppressing her wolf instincts. "I've always run a little warm," she said simply. "Family trait, I suppose." Doris didn't push further, though Elena caught the thoughtful look in her eyes, the kind of look that suggested she suspected there was more to the story than she was being told. Still, Doris proved trustworthy and discreet, focusing entirely on ensuring Elena's health rather than digging into secrets that weren't hers to uncover. As the months passed, Elena's isolation weighed on her more heavily than she anticipated. She had grown up surrounded by the constant presence of family and community, and the silence of her solitary life in Millbrook often felt suffocating. She missed her mother's voice, her brother's teasing laughter, the comfort of knowing others were always close by should she need them. Now, in the quiet hours of the night, she had only herself and the small flutter of movement beneath her ribs to keep her company. She wrote letters she never sent, addressed to her brother, pouring out thoughts and fears she couldn't share with anyone in Millbrook. She wrote about her hopes for the child growing inside her, about the fear that gripped her whenever she imagined what might happen if Damien or his people ever found her. She wrote about missing home, even as she reminded herself constantly why she couldn't return. Meanwhile, in Kingsley territory, Damien's search for Elena had quietly expanded despite his earlier caution to keep it discreet. Corwin, his tracker, had exhausted every lead within Wolf territories and had begun reaching out to human contacts scattered across various towns, individuals who owed the Kingsley Park favors or discretion in exchange for past assistance. Damien found himself distracted more often than he cared to admit, his advisors noting a restlessness in their alpha king that hadn't been present before the truce gathering months earlier. During council meetings, his mind would wander, memories of that single night surfacing unbidden, the way Elena had looked at him without pretense, without seeking anything from his position or power. "You seem distant, Alpha," his second in command, a steady and loyal wolf named Garrett, observed one evening as they reviewed border reports together. "Is something troubling you?" Damien hesitated before answering, unwilling to reveal the full truth even to someone he trusted deeply. "There's an unresolved matter from the truce gathering," he said carefully. "Nothing that concerns Park business directly. Just something I need to understand." Garrett studied him for a moment, clearly sensing there was more beneath the surface, but chose not to press further, respecting the boundaries his alpha had drawn. As weeks turned into months, Damien's instinct to find Elena only intensified, an inexplicable pull he couldn't quite rationalize away as simple curiosity anymore. Alphas were known to develop deep connections to those who might become significant in their lives, bonds that formed sometimes without full awareness of both parties involved. Though Damien didn't yet understand the reason behind his persistent unease, some part of him recognized that whatever connection had formed between them that night hadn't simply faded away. Back in Millbrook, Alena entered her final month of pregnancy, her body heavy and exhausted, her nights filled with restless sleep interrupted by anxious dreams. She dreamed often of being discovered, of Kingsley wolves appearing suddenly at her door, of losing her child to political forces beyond her control. She would wake gasping, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach, reassuring herself that her baby was still safe, still hidden, still theirs alone. Doris visited more frequently as the due date approached, monitoring Elena's health closely and preparing for a home birth given Elena's clear reluctance to visit the local hospital, where identification and paperwork might expose the truth she had worked so hard to conceal. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Doris told her during one visit, noting the determination in Elena's eyes despite the obvious exhaustion weighing on her. "Whatever you're running from, whatever brought you here alone, your child is lucky to have a mother willing to sacrifice this much for their safety." Alena managed a small, tired smile, grateful for the kindness even as guilt gnawed at her for the lies she continued to tell. She thought often of Damien during these final weeks, wondering if he ever suspected the truth, wondering if fate would eventually force their paths to cross again despite everything she had done to prevent it. She thought, too, of the child she would soon meet, wondering whose features they would carry, whose eyes, whose expressions. She wondered if they would inherit their father's commanding presence or her own quiet resilience, or perhaps some blend of both that would make them entirely their own person, separate from the political weight surrounding their birth. One evening, as a storm rolled through Millbrook, thunder rattling the windows of her small apartment, Alena felt the first unmistakable signs that her time had finally arrived. She called Doris immediately, her voice steady despite the fear pulsing through her, and within the hour, Doris arrived with her medical bag, prepared to guide Alena through the birth of her child. Margaret arrived shortly after, having insisted weeks earlier that she wanted to be present for support, unwilling to let Alena face such a significant moment entirely alone despite the secrets that remained between them. Her presence brought unexpected comfort, a reminder that even in her isolation, Alena had managed to find genuine kindness among strangers who had become something closer to family. As the storm raged outside, thunder echoing through the small apartment, Alena focused entirely on the process unfolding within her body, gripping Margaret's hand tightly during moments of intense pain, listening to Doris's calm and steady instructions guiding her through each stage of labor. Hours passed in a blur of exhaustion and determination, the storm outside mirroring the intensity of what Alena experienced within. She thought of her mother during the most difficult moments, wishing desperately for her presence, for the guidance only a mother could offer during such a profound experience. She thought of Damien too, unable to stop the memories from surfacing even amid the overwhelming physical demands of labor, wondering if he would ever know about this moment, about the child they had created together. As dawn approached and the storm began to weaken, Alena felt the final surge of effort required, pushing through exhaustion that had settled deep into her bones. Doris's voice grew more urgent, more focused, guiding her through the final moments before new life would finally enter the world. And then, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, a small cry broke through the silence of the apartment, high and clear and undeniably alive. Alena felt tears streaming down her face as Doris placed her newborn daughter gently against her chest, the tiny weight both overwhelming and instantly familiar, as though she had known this child her entire life despite meeting her for the first time only moments ago. "She's beautiful," Margaret whispered, her own eyes glistening with emotion as she watched the tender moment unfold before her. Alena stared down at her daughter, taking in every detail of the small face now resting against her, and felt a love so immediate and consuming that it eclipsed every fear she had carried throughout her pregnancy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever danger still threatened from the world she had left behind, she knew in that moment she would face them all without hesitation to protect this child. She named her daughter Aurea, a name she had chosen months earlier during quiet nights of reflection, meaning something delicate yet strong, much like the journey that had brought her into existence. As she held Aurea close, exhaustion finally overtaking her, Alena allowed herself a brief moment of peace, unaware that this fragile calm would soon be tested in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The first weeks with Aurea passed in a haze of sleepless nights and quiet wonder. Alena learned quickly that her daughter was unlike any ordinary infant. Within days, Aria's grip was remarkably strong, her tiny fingers curling around Elena's thumb with a firmness that surprised even Doris during a routine checkup. "She's a strong little thing," Doris remarked, gently testing Aria's reflexes. "Advanced for her age, if I'm being honest. Her muscle tone, her alertness, it's all quite unusual." Alena forced a smile, brushing off the observation as best she could, though inwardly her heart raced. She had known, of course, that a child born from an alpha bloodline would carry certain traits beyond typical human development, but witnessing it firsthand made the reality impossible to ignore. She would need to be even more careful now, not just protecting her own secret, but a growing child whose very nature threatened to reveal the truth with every passing month. By the time Aria turned 3 months old, her eyes had begun to shift in color under certain lighting, flickering between a soft brown and something closer to amber gold, an unmistakable trait among wolves of strong alpha lineage. Alena noticed it first during a quiet evening feeding, the way the lamplight caught Aria's gaze and revealed the shift, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. She began adjusting the lighting in their apartment, keeping curtains drawn during certain hours, avoiding situations where others might notice the unusual color in her daughter's eyes. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, but Alena refused to let her guard down even for a moment. Margaret, who had become something of an honorary grandmother figure, often stopped by with homemade meals and gentle company, though she remained blissfully unaware of the true nature of the secrets Alena carried. She adored Aria completely, marveling at how quickly the child seemed to grow, how alert and curious she was even in her earliest months. "That baby watches everything," Margaret commented one afternoon, laughing softly as Aria's gaze followed her movement across the small kitchen with unusual focus for an infant her age. "She's going to be a clever one, mark my words." Alena laughed along, though the comment settled uneasily in her chest. Clever was one word for it. Aria's development continued at a pace that both amazed and terrified her, each new milestone arriving weeks ahead of typical human timelines. By 6 months, Aria could support her own weight when held upright, her small legs surprisingly sturdy. By 8 months, she had begun crawling with a speed that left Alena breathless trying to keep up. Doris, during these visits, grew increasingly curious, though she remained professionally reserved about voicing outright suspicion. She had delivered dozens of children over her decade as a midwife, and she recognized when something departed from the ordinary. Still, she respected Elena's privacy, offering guidance and support without pressing for answers Alena clearly wasn't ready to share. As Aria approached her first year, Alena found herself settling into a rhythm of cautious motherhood, balancing her job at the diner with the demands of raising an increasingly perceptive child. She had built walls around their life that felt, for the first time in months, almost sustainable. She allowed herself small moments of hope, imagining a future where perhaps, eventually, once Aria was old enough and once enough time had passed, they might find a way to live without constant fear looming over them. But hope, Alena would soon learn, was a fragile thing. Far away in Kingsley territory, Damian's search had reached a turning point. Corwin, after months of quiet investigation stretching across dozens of towns and cities, had finally uncovered a lead that felt different from the countless dead ends before it. A human contact in a neighboring county had mentioned, almost in passing, a young woman who had arrived alone roughly a year ago in a small town called Millbrook, someone who kept to herself, someone whose description matched the details Corwin had been quietly gathering for months. "It's not confirmed, Alpha," Corwin said carefully as he presented the information to Damian in his private study. "But the timing aligns. The description aligns. If this is her, she's been living quietly, working under a different name." Damian's chest tightened with an intensity that surprised him. He had almost convinced himself over the past months that his search was simply unfinished business, an unresolved question demanding an answer. But hearing this news now, the possibility that he might finally find her, stirred something far deeper than curiosity. "I want to see for myself," Damian said quietly, his decision made before Corwin had even finished speaking. "Arrange for us to travel to Millbrook. Quietly. I don't want any disturbance until I understand the full situation." Corwin nodded, though he studied his Alpha with a thoughtful expression, clearly recognizing the personal weight behind this pursuit that extended beyond simple political curiosity. "Understood, Alpha." I'll make the arrangements. Within days, Damien found himself traveling toward Millbrook alongside Corwin, disguising their journey as a routine inspection of distant park contacts to avoid drawing unnecessary attention from the council, who remained unaware of the personal nature driving this particular trip. As they crossed into human territory, Damien felt an unfamiliar restlessness building within him, an anticipation he couldn't quite explain even to himself. He told himself repeatedly that he simply needed closure, needed to understand why she had vanished so suddenly after their night together, needed to satisfy the persistent unease that had followed him for nearly a year. But beneath these rationalizations, something deeper stirred, an instinct that refused to be ignored, growing stronger the closer they traveled toward the small town where Elena had rebuilt her life in secret. Millbrook came into view as their car rounded a bend surrounded by dense forest, the small town nestled quietly among rolling hills, appearing peaceful and unremarkable to any casual observer. Damien studied the town as they entered, his senses immediately heightening, absorbing every scent, every subtle detail carried on the breeze. "We'll start with the diner Corwin mentioned," Damien said, his voice steady despite the tension building within him. "If she's here, someone will know her." They parked along Main Street, the modest storefronts lining both sides of the road giving the town a quaint, unhurried charm. Damien stepped out of the car, drawing in a slow breath, allowing his senses to expand outward, searching for anything familiar amid the unfamiliar surroundings. And then, faint but unmistakable, he caught it. A scent carried on the wind, distant but achingly familiar, a scent he hadn't forgotten despite nearly a year of separation. His entire body went rigid, his heart pounding as recognition flooded through him. She was here. She was truly here. But beneath her scent, woven so subtly that most wolves might have missed it entirely, was something else, something that made Damien's breath catch in his throat. A second scent, smaller, newer, unmistakably connected to his own bloodline in a way that left no room for doubt. His hands clenched at his sides as the realization crashed over him with the force of a physical blow. Elena hadn't just disappeared to avoid political complications. She had been hiding something far more significant, something that changed everything about the past year of searching, something that explained the persistent, unshakable pull he had felt from the very beginning. "Alpha." Corwin's voice cut through his shock, noting the sudden change in his Alpha's expression. "What is it?" Damien didn't answer immediately, his mind racing through the implications, through months of searching that suddenly made painful, undeniable sense. He turned slowly toward Corwin, his voice low and controlled despite the storm of emotion building within him. "She had a child," Damien said quietly. "My child." Corwin's eyes widened, the weight of this revelation settling heavily between them. Neither spoke for a long moment, the quiet street around them oblivious to the magnitude of what had just been uncovered. "We need to find her," Damien said finally, his voice hardening with determined resolve. "Now." They moved through town with purposeful urgency, following the faint trail of scent that grew stronger with each step, leading them steadily toward a small apartment building above a laundromat near the edge of town. Damien's heart pounded with an intensity he hadn't experienced in years, a mixture of anger, confusion, and an unexpected surge of protective instinct toward a child he hadn't even met yet. As they approached the building, Damien paused briefly at the base of the stairs leading to the apartment above, drawing in another slow breath, steadying himself for whatever confrontation awaited him. Nearly a year of searching, of unexplained restlessness, of instincts he couldn't quite understand, all of it converged in this single moment. He climbed the stairs slowly, Corwin following close behind, each step bringing him closer to answers he both desperately wanted and feared to receive. When he reached the door, he raised his hand, hesitating only briefly before knocking firmly against the wood. Inside, Elena froze at the sound, her heart lurching painfully as an instinct deep within her recognized something in that knock, something achingly familiar despite the impossible circumstances. She looked down at Oria, playing quietly on a blanket spread across the living room floor, her daughter's amber gold eyes glancing up curiously at the sudden interruption. Elena's breath caught in her throat as understanding crashed over her with devastating clarity. After nearly a year of careful hiding, of sacrifices made and secrets kept, the moment she had feared most had finally arrived. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her, and walked toward the door, knowing with absolute certainty who stood waiting on the other side. Elena opened the door, and there he was. Damien stood in the narrow hallway, taller than she remembered, his presence filling the small space with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. His eyes, dark and sharp, moved over her face with a mixture of relief and something far more complicated, something that looked dangerously close to hurt. Neither spoke for a long moment. Behind Damien, Cohen remained a respectful step back, his gaze fixed politely elsewhere, though Elena could sense the tension radiating from him as well. "Elena," Damien finally said, his voice rough with restrained emotion. "You have a lot to explain." She stepped back from the doorway, silently allowing him entry, unable to find her voice quickly enough to respond. Damien entered slowly, his gaze sweeping across the modest apartment, taking in the small details of the life she had built in hiding, until his eyes landed on the blanket spread across the living room floor where Aurea sat, watching the newcomer with wide, curious eyes. Damien went utterly still. His breath caught as he stared at the child, at the unmistakable amber gold flickering in her gaze, at features that so clearly mirrored his own despite her young age. The weight of the truth settled over him fully now, no longer a suspicion carried on the wind, but an undeniable reality sitting directly before him. "She's mine," he said quietly, not a question, simply a statement absorbing an impossible truth. Elena's throat tightened, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes as months of fear and isolation finally caught up with her all at once. "Her name is Aurea," she said softly. "She's almost a year old." Damien's jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his side as a storm of emotions crossed his features, anger and hurt and something far more vulnerable or worrying for dominance. "A year," he repeated, his voice tight. "You've kept my daughter from me for an entire year, Elena. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what you took from me?" "I understand exactly what I was protecting her from," Elena replied, her voice trembling but firm, years of fear finally finding release. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if the council learned about her the moment she was conceived? A child born from an Ashwood woman and the Kingsley Alpha King. She would have been seen as a political weapon before she ever took her first breath. I couldn't let that happen to her." Damien's expression flickered, the anger tempering slightly as her words settled over him, forcing him to confront realities he hadn't fully considered in the heat of his initial reaction. He knew, deep down, that her fears weren't unfounded. The council on both sides had a long history of treating such situations with cold political calculation rather than compassion. "You could have told me," he said, quieter now, though the hurt remained evident beneath his words. "I would have protected you both. I would have found a way." "Would you?" Elena asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Or would you have been forced into decisions dictated by advisors and elders who saw her only as a complication to be managed?" "I couldn't risk it, Damien. I couldn't risk her." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken pain on both sides. Aurea, sensing the tension in the room despite her young age, let out a small whimper from her spot on the blanket. Elena moved instinctively to comfort her, scooping her daughter into her arms, and Damien watched the interaction with an expression that softened despite the storm still churning within him. "May I?" he asked quietly, his voice unexpectedly gentle as he gestured toward Aurea. Elena hesitated only a moment before nodding, carefully passing their daughter into Damien's arms. He held her with surprising tenderness, his large hands cradling her small frame with a care that seemed to surprise even himself. Aurea studied him intently, her amber gold eyes locked onto his face, and after a moment, she reached up with a tiny hand, brushing against his jaw with unmistakable curiosity rather than fear. Something shifted in Damien's expression as he held his daughter for the first time, the anger and hurt momentarily giving way to an overwhelming rush of protective love that settled deep into his chest. He had spent nearly a year searching for answers, never imagining the truth would arrive in such a profound and unexpected form. "She's beautiful," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't anticipated feeling so strongly. Elena watched the exchange, tears slipping freely down her cheeks now, relief and lingering fear mixing together in equal measure. "I never wanted to keep her from you," she said softly. "I wanted to protect her until I found a way to do both, to keep her safe and eventually let her know her father. I just didn't know how, given everything standing between our paths." Damien looked up from Aurea, meeting Elena's gaze directly, his expression firm with newfound resolve. That changes now, he said. Whatever fears drove you to hide her, whatever dangers you believed threatened her safety, I will not allow them to continue. She is my daughter, and you are the mother of my heir. I will not let political maneuvering dictate her future, or yours. Alena searched his face, looking for any sign of empty promises, but found only steady determination reflected in his gaze. It won't be simple, she warned. There are those in your council who will see her as a threat rather than an heir. There are those who may not accept a child born to an Ashwood mother. Then they will learn to accept it, Damien said firmly, because I will not abandon my own blood out of fear of political inconvenience. I have spent months searching for you, Alena, driven by instinct I didn't fully understand until this very moment. I am not walking away now that I finally understand why. Corwin, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, cleared his throat gently from where he stood near the doorway. Alpha, if I may. There will be logistics to consider. Bringing Alena and Oria back to Kingsley territory will require careful planning, particularly regarding how this is presented to the council and how we manage relations with Ashwood, given Alena's status within that pack. Damien nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on Alena, the weight of everything still settling between them. We'll handle it carefully, he said. But we will handle it together, starting now. Alena felt a fragile hope beginning to bloom within her chest, tempered still by the very real dangers that awaited them, but no longer carrying the isolation she had endured throughout the past year. For the first time since fleeing Ashwood territory, she felt the possibility of a future where she wouldn't have to face these challenges entirely alone. There's something else you should know, Alena said quietly, drawing Damien's attention back to her. My brother suspects something happened around the time I disappeared. He may have already alerted the Ashwood Council to irregularities, even without knowing the full truth. If we're not careful, this could unravel faster than we can control it. Damien's expression sharpened with renewed focus, the protective instinct of an alpha king settling firmly into place. Then we move quickly, he said. I won't have Aria's safety left to chance, not now that I know the truth. He looked down again at his daughter, still resting peacefully in his arms, her small fingers curled loosely around one of his. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever political storms threatened to complicate their path forward, Damien knew with absolute certainty that he would face them all without hesitation, driven by a love for his daughter that had ignited the moment he first held her. Alena watched the tender scene before her, allowing herself, cautiously, to believe that perhaps the sacrifices of the past year hadn't been made in vain, that perhaps there truly was a path forward where her daughter could grow up knowing both the safety Alena had fought so hard to provide and the father she deserved to know. But even as hope flickered within her, she knew the true test of Damien's resolve, and their family's safety, still lay ahead. Within 2 days, Damien arranged for Alena and Oria to travel back to Kingsley territory under careful protection, avoiding main roads and non-pack contacts to minimize the risk of word spreading before he could control the narrative. Alena said a tearful goodbye to Margaret, unable to explain the full truth but promising to stay in touch, grateful beyond words for the kindness shown to her during the most difficult year of her life. Margaret hugged her tightly, tears in her own eyes, sensing that something significant was unfolding even without understanding its full nature. The journey back felt surreal to Alena, watching the familiar landscape of human territory gradually give way to the dense forest marking the boundary of wolflands. She held Oria close throughout the drive, her daughter surprisingly calm despite the unfamiliar surroundings, as though some instinctive part of her recognized the significance of returning to her father's territory. Upon arrival at the Kingsley estate, a sprawling manor set deep within ancient woodland, Alena felt the weight of unfamiliar eyes upon her immediately. Staff and pack members alike paused as they passed, curiosity and speculation evident in their expressions, though none dared question their Alpha King directly about the unexpected guests he had brought home. Damien wasted no time addressing the situation directly. Within a day of their arrival, he called an emergency council meeting, gathering the pack elders and senior advisors to address the matter before rumors could spiral beyond his control. Alena waited nervously in a private chamber, Oria resting quietly in her arms, while Damien prepared to face the political storm that awaited him. The council chamber fell silent as Damien entered, his expression composed but unmistakably resolute. Seated around the long wooden table were the pack's most influential elders, including Councilwoman Vivian Ashcroft, a sharp and calculating woman who had long harbored ambitions of seeing her own niece paired with the Alpha King to strengthen internal alliances within Kingsley territory. Alpha, Vivian began, her tone carefully measured despite the tension evident in her posture. We've had troubling rumors regarding your recent trip. Perhaps you'd care to clarify the situation before speculation grows unchecked. Damien met her gaze evenly, refusing to be intimidated by the underlying challenge in her words. I have a daughter, he said plainly, allowing the words to settle over the room without hesitation or apology. Her mother is Elena Whitfield of the Ashwood Park. I am claiming both my daughter and Elena as members of this park, effective immediately. A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber, shock and disbelief evident on several faces. Vivian's expression tightened, though she maintained her composure, choosing her words carefully. Alpha, surely you understand the complications this presents. An heir born to an Ashwood woman, conceived outside of any sanctioned union, this could destabilize the fragile truce between our parks. The council will have serious concerns about legitimacy and loyalty. The child is my blood, Damien replied firmly, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of his position. Her legitimacy is not in question. As for loyalty, Elena risked everything, including her own safety and standing within her birth park, to protect our daughter from exactly the kind of political manipulation being suggested here. That is not disloyalty. That is devotion. Several elders exchanged uncertain glances, clearly weighing the implications of challenging their Alpha King directly on such a personal matter. Vivian, however, remained undeterred, sensing an opportunity to press her advantage further. And what of Ashwood's response, she pressed. Surely they will have their own concerns regarding one of their own bearing an heir for a rival park. This could reignite tensions we have spent years attempting to ease. Damien had anticipated this concern and addressed it directly. I have already sent word to Ashwood's Alpha, requesting a formal meeting to discuss the matter diplomatically. Elena's status within Ashwood will be addressed through proper channels, and I intend to ensure this situation strengthens rather than damages relations between our parks, provided cooler heads prevail on both sides. The chamber remained tense, though Damien's calm and measured approach gradually shifted the atmosphere from outright opposition toward cautious acceptance among several key elders. Garrett, Damien's loyal second in command, spoke up in support, his voice steady and respectful. The Alpha's judgment has never led this park astray before, Garrett said, addressing the room directly. I trust his decision here as I have trusted his leadership in every other matter. We should extend that same trust now. Slowly, the tide within the chamber began to shift, several elders nodding in cautious agreement, recognizing both the strength of Damien's resolve and the validity of his reasoning. Vivian, though clearly displeased, recognized the futility of continued opposition and reluctantly conceded, though her expression suggested the matter was far from settled in her mind. Meanwhile, word of the situation reached Ashwood territory swiftly, causing considerable uproar among the park elders there as well. Elena's brother, upon learning the truth of his sister's disappearance and the child she had been protecting, felt a complicated mixture of relief and lingering worry, grateful she was safe but uncertain what this meant for her standing within their own park. A formal meeting was arranged between the two Alpha Kings within the following weeks, a tense but ultimately productive negotiation that resulted in an agreement recognizing Aria's legitimacy as Damien's heir while also preserving Elena's connection to her birth park, allowing for continued relations between Ashwood and Kingsley territories moving forward. The truce, rather than being destabilized as some had feared, found unexpected reinforcement through the diplomatic handling of the situation, both parks recognizing the potential benefits of strengthened ties through Aria's unique heritage. As the political dust settled over the following months, Elena found herself gradually adjusting to life within Kingsley territory, building tentative friendships among park members who had initially regarded her with wary curiosity but slowly warmed to her genuine nature and evident devotion to her daughter. Garrett's wife, a kind woman named Charlotte, took Elena under her wing, helping her navigate the unfamiliar customs and social dynamics of her new home. Damien, meanwhile, made deliberate efforts to strengthen his relationship with Elena beyond simply their shared responsibility toward Aria. He visited often, spending time with both mother and daughter, gradually rebuilding trust that had been strained by months of separation and the painful confrontation that had followed their reunion. I understand why you ran, he told her one evening, as they sat together watching Aria play contentedly on the floor of her nursery, now filled with soft light and gentle warmth rather than the shadows of hiding that had once surrounded her. I don't like that you felt you had no other choice, but I understand the fear driving your decision. Alena studied him carefully, searching for any lingering resentment, but found only genuine understanding reflected in his gaze. I regret the year we lost, she admitted softly. I regret that you missed her first year, her first smile, her first steps. But I don't regret protecting her the only way I knew how at the time. Then let's focus on the years ahead, Damien said, reaching over to gently take her hand, a small gesture that carried significant weight given the journey they had both endured to reach this moment. Let's make sure she never has reason to fear the world she was born into. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened naturally, built not on the reckless passion of their first encounter, but on a growing foundation of mutual respect, shared responsibility, and an undeniable connection that had never truly faded despite the distance and secrets that had once separated them. Alena found herself falling for Damien in a way that felt entirely different from before, grounded now in genuine partnership rather than a single fleeting night. Oria, meanwhile, continued to thrive within her new environment, her development remaining remarkably advanced for her age, much to the fascination and pride of the pack members who quickly grew to adore their young heir. Her amber gold eyes, once a source of fear for Alena, became instead a celebrated symbol of her unique heritage, a visible reminder of the strength and resilience that had brought her safely into the world despite the odds stacked against her. Vivian Ashcroft, though never fully embracing the situation, gradually softened her opposition as the months passed, particularly after witnessing firsthand the genuine devotion Damien showed toward both Alena and their daughter, along with the diplomatic benefits emerging from strengthened ties with Ashwood territory. Political tensions that had once threatened to derail everything eventually settled into a stable, if occasionally cautious, peace. On a warm afternoon nearly 6 months after their reunion, Damien gathered the pack together for a formal ceremony, one that would publicly recognize Oria as his rightful heir and Alena as his chosen mate, solidifying their family's place within Kingsley territory beyond any future challenge or question. Standing before the assembled pack, Alena felt a profound sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since fleeing her childhood home over a year earlier. As Damien spoke words of commitment and devotion before their gathered pack, Alena held Oria close, watching her daughter reach out curiously toward the assembled crowd, utterly unaware of the significance surrounding this moment, yet radiating the same quiet strength that had carried her safely through the uncertain beginning of her life. When the ceremony concluded, Damien turned to Alena, his expression filled with warmth and unmistakable love. No matter what challenges come our way, he said quietly, just for her to hear, we face them together now. Always. Alena smiled, tears of joy rather than fear glistening in her eyes for the first time in longer than she could remember. Together, she agreed softly. As the sun began to set over Kingsley territory, casting golden light across the gathered pack celebrating their Alpha King's newly recognized family, Alena felt the last remnants of fear and isolation finally give way to something she had once believed impossible to reclaim, genuine peace, and a future finally free from hiding.